Welcome to Fostering Parenthood. Consent, porn,
normal relationship,
being a teen mom,
my first real adult love,
what it's like to be a foster child.
Every person I had an attachment with had left.
How trauma impacts your decision making.
I didn't feel very accepted and I didn't feel very safe.
And he said, you are lowering your own value by putting up with this.
But I wish someone was there to be there and tell me that it wasn't okay.
How do I honor providing that space for them?
It's about being in a place to be open to someone sharing with you their hurts.
Making sure that you guys are going into things open and supportive, or just even willing, right, to have these conversations.
I need you to find the strength to call someone and say, I'm drowning right now.
It's helpful to know yourself first as a caregiver.
But I just want caregivers to know that you're not alone.
You called me mom. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fostering Parenthood, where we take a deep dive into the complex world of foster care and parenting. Today's episode is focused on an area that many caregivers often find challenging: engaging in meaningful and open conversations with the youth in their care about sexual and reproductive health. This isn't just about prevention, it's about liberation, about ensuring our young people understand, respect, and embrace their own sexuality and bodies, and empowering them to make informed decisions. Our guest today is an expert in navigating these difficult waters. We're excited to welcome Steph Zapata, a nationally recognized, award-winning sexuality educator hailing from the Bronx. They have become a long-term catalyst for change within sexuality education through their radically intentional approaches that call out systems of oppression and call in individuals and communities to disrupt and reimagine what can be. Steph has been a beacon of change and understanding in this critical field, and they're here to guide us in developing the listening skills we need to have truly productive conversations with our youth about these critical issues. During the recording of this podcast, I learned a lot. I felt like I wanted to go burn my bra and be liberated and free. So join me and see what it does for you. I am so excited today to be joined by Steph Zapata. Steph, you are going to help me to bridge a gap that I live with every day. And I am so grateful to have you. Could you please share with me your background and something that you're passionate about?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Steph. I'm Boricua, Puerto Rican from the Bronx in New York. I've been doing sex ed for over a decade at this point. And what I'm passionate about is actually sex ed in the ways that I get to do it. And so how I approach sex education is to really bring in a whole person approach. I found that a lot of sex ed leaves out the parents, leaves out the care providers, leaves out this idea of emotional intelligence and wellness. And so for me, I'm always happy to talk about our feelings throughout our life as we navigate sexuality and how we can support one another in our respective paths as well.
Wow. I hate to say it, but in the 90s, I was a sex ed, what I considered a sex ed teacher or instructor.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, I was at a high school and there were literally 3,000 kids in the bleachers of this auditorium. And that's how they taught sex ed in high school, right? And it was on a teen pregnancy prevention grant. And I thought, I got this. So of course I bring a banana, right? And a condom.
Not the banana.
Yeah. And everybody's like, thank God my kids didn't go to that school, right? Because they would have been horrified. But I pull out the banana, I pull out the condom, and I'm thinking, what if I mess this up, right? Yeah. But I did it. Brought these huge posters of, chancres and warts on a penis and, and did the scare tactic, right? Because prevention was all we ever talked about. We didn't talk about the human being. We didn't talk about, what it's like to be the whole person, and that sexuality is far more than just prevention.
Yeah.
And I know that one of the things that I read was you call it liberation.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
It looks like all folks of all identities and all abilities having access to information that helps them to get to know and understand their bodies, their desires, their emotional state for life. You know, sex education is not just something that we need or that should be present with like 12 to 15-year-olds. I'm a firm believer in sex ed because it's a part of learning, and learning is a lifelong process, you know? So for me, when I think of liberation, I think of being able to understand what's happening with my body, being able to determine who I want to give access to and what that looks like for me, and how do I protect myself in that process, rather than, you know, I mean, I did the same thing. I was the exact same sex educator, you know, in the very beginning, it was all about shame and stigma and prevention. And that doesn't lead people to a life that is liberation focused, let alone pleasure focused, right? It is very rigid and scary and condescending and vilifying to hear that if you have sex, you'll get pregnant and die. It's the worst thing. So liberation is really just the opposite of that, offering all of the information that sex can be pleasurable. Yes, our bodies can experience some unintended impacts. And guess what? We can keep going and we can keep learning and tend to ourselves in all of the ways.
I had a 12-year-old come with me, and he's not one of the kids in my care, but he often comes for a weekend. We have a relational permanence relationship with him, right? So he'll always be part of our family, but he's in a higher level of care. And he came this last weekend, no lie, and he brought this little black box, and it was locked. And he called it my locked box. And I said, buddy, what's in the locked box?
Yeah.
And he goes, I have to keep it with me everywhere I go. And I said, well, can I see what's in it? He unlocks the box, and there's 5 condoms in it.
Nice.
And I said, what are those? And he said, they're condoms. I have to take them everywhere I go. I said, well, are you planning on having sex while you're here? I mean, you don't know me quite yet, but that's kind of how I roll.
Yeah.
And he said, no. And he said, but the nurse said I had to take them everywhere, or I could get diseases or have a baby.
Wow.
And I said, well, okay. And I tucked it away, and we locked the box up again.
Yeah.
What are we doing wrong? I mean, I know that's a loaded question, but that made me so uncomfortable as a caregiver because I thought, is this the time that I talk about, well, you don't have to have sex, but you can if you want. It's your right. But I didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't, or I'm trying to shy away and move away from this like right or wrong language, because I think that telling people that we're doing things wrong doesn't feel great. And so for a lot of us, when we receive that, we're like, well, I'm not going to do it, then I'm not going to try, right? Like I feel stupid, I feel inadequate, so let me just leave it or not even bother. You know, a lot of the parents that I work with, they'll say, I don't have all the information, so I don't even try to have the conversation. This idea of always wanting to get it right and to get it perfectly is actually holding us back, you know? And so even with the nurse who did that, what I firmly believe is that that nurse likely had that young person's best interest at heart, right? This notion of, well, I know the reality of the world and STIs and unintended pregnancies, and I want to help you be safe, but what we've gotten so mixed up in is that the way to keep someone safe is to control them. That's not the same thing. Safety is not actually about control. And most of our sex education is actually about the policing of our bodies and the policing of young people's bodies even more, right? Don't have sex because it's terrible, you're too young, and you're irresponsible, you don't know what's gonna happen. That's scary. That's really scary. And so while we're trying our best to say like, hey, I wanna set you up for success, I don't want you to maybe go off your path by having like sex before you're ready, what we're actually doing when we do things like that is terrifying kids. We're terrifying them of their own bodies, their own desires. And with that fear comes a lot of internalized shame. And so I'm actually surprised that that young person even felt comfortable enough to be like, yeah, it's condoms. Like, that's great. That's a really great manifestation of the environment and the relationship that you've developed with them. And, you know, maybe let's not tell young people that if they don't carry around condoms, something terrible is going to happen to them.
It sounds like control, but even more so.
Yeah.
What concerns me is it's control with fear.
Yeah.
It's that sense of, I'm going to tell you what's right for your body.
Yep.
And so right now, I don't know, as a caregiver, again, I'm thinking that there's two ways. One is I feel like I need to share with them all of this information so that they can make a good choice for them.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there's that kind of that message that I hear in my head that says, and they could get a disease and they could get this and they could get that. And keeping in mind, Steph, that, we have kiddos that come to us with STIs.
Yes.
So I have a newborn that came to me a year ago with syphilis.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, he could be blind,
Yeah.
right? And so that was something that we were very concerned all the way through. And so there is that fear.
Yeah.
Because it's innately there based on these horrible things that you can get, right?
Yeah.
Some are treatable, right? They're bacterial.
Yep.
Some are not.
Yeah.
They're viral and they stay with you. They stick on you forever,
Yeah.
right? I want to find that liberation. I want to find that place where I can celebrate my children's sexuality.
Yeah.
Like, this is your body, man. I want you to enjoy it. I want you to be in a place where you're not shamed by it.
Yeah.
And yet, I also want them to be cautious because it's scary out there.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So where's that balance?
That's the duality of life, I think. And I love to talk about sex ed like this, but it really is a great practicum and pedagogy for all of life, right? Being able to hold those two things simultaneously. I want the absolute best for you. And I know that talking about safety and barriers is super, super conductive to that. And I want you to be able to make the decisions for yourself and to live your best life in the ways that you define for yourself. So I think that the first step is to offer that to yourself, right? For adults, for parents, for care providers, we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to come with compassion for ourselves and say, I had really shitty sex ed. My mom told me the worst things would happen if I ever had sex. And that is a conversation starter with young people right then and there, offering that vulnerability of hey, I'm also a little bit nervous to have this conversation with you.
Right.
I feel a little bit uncomfortable,
Right.
naming our limitations and saying, I don't have all of the answers, but I promise that I'm just here to listen, to support, and to offer what I do have, is a great place to start. Because I think that young people have this notion of adults of they know everything and they're condescending and they're superior. But we, as the adults, get to break that. We get to disrupt that narrative and say, I don't actually, I'm nervous too. And so just naming it, right? So I have nieces and nephews and I have this conversation with them all the time and I'm terrified and I'm like, listen, ultimately what I want is for you to be able to live your life in the ways that you've defined it as best and safest for yourself, right? And it's important for you to know that I come with my own things attached to me. So I've got the internalized learnings of my family, my Catholic upbringing, right? My terrible sex education. And so all of that is going to intersect at some points, and welcoming in the accountability of when it comes up and it doesn't feel good for you, name that to me. Let me know that I'm coming from a place that is scaring you, or that maybe is doing a little bit more harm than good, is so, so critical to get to that point. But again, I firmly believe that we cannot offer it to young people or to anyone that we're in community with if we don't offer it to ourselves first. So really doing the self-reflective and compassionate work of understanding your own journey with sexuality, your own journey to identity, to your pleasure practices, to how you have policed your own body, how society has told you to shrink or that something's wrong with you because your body doesn't do this or because you don't like that. That self-acceptance, that non-judgmental environment then pours out of us into our young people. But truthfully, if we're not starting here, we don't really have a lot that we can give.
Wow. I have some homework to do.
Yeah, we all do.
That vulnerability piece doesn't just work with your children or youth. Mm-hmm. It works within us, right?
Yep.
None of us like to be vulnerable. None of us like to admit that. Yeah. Terrifying. It's like, oh God, what if they call me on it? What if I say the wrong thing? What if, right?
Yeah.
And then so what I usually do is I mask it by coming off as the professional sex ed teacher. So I'm like, hey, have a seat. And
yeah.
I usually start those conversations in the car because they can't get out. I mean,
You're
sorry.
trapped.
You are trapped. There's no phone. I'm not going to answer it if it rings. And so this is our safe kind of, bubble that we can just be really open and frank. And although I say a lot of, well, how are you feeling about what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm really good at really listening. And I think that that's something that I have to work on is stop talking and start listening. Because why would I bring a topic about penis and vagina when they just really want to talk about their sexuality or their gender or, so being able to listen and understand where they are and meeting them where they are is, I don't know, I think that's where I really need to work on it. And in addition, I don't have a hard time talking about sex, but would I talk to you about my sex? No. Right. You know what I mean? Like that's still very private. And so that liberation, I think I got stuck in the 50s.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to be two people.
Yeah.
It's hard to wear the hat of being told if you masturbate, your penis is going to fall off. Right. Sorry, Steph, but I remember those things with my brothers. It's like, if you touch that, it's going to fall off. And then be liberated and vulnerable and sit down with our kids and say, hey, masturbation's cool. It feels good. It's really hard to bridge that gap for a lot of folks.
Yeah. What I have found to be helpful in my personal practice and in the parents and like care providers that I work with is to name that bridge what it is, because what that bridge is a societal and systemic fuck up, right? Like that is how we got there. You didn't just decide that you wanted to believe or hear that if someone masturbates, their parts will fall off. No, we were conditioned. We were taught that. And I think that when we can name a thing as a systemic or societal influence, we can give ourselves a little bit more compassion. And so in the moments where maybe that negative sex educator is popping up, right? Where it's like, don't do the thing. For the love of God, don't do the thing. Then I can check myself and say, I think I'm on that bridge right now. I think I'm on that bridge and that's not where I want to be communicating with you from. So check yourself and, just give yourself the grace of taking a break. I've noticed that there seems to be a really big sense of urgency when it comes to the talk, right? Like, I've got to get it all. I got to do all the information right now. I got him in the car. Like, we have to do it all right now.
It's a short drive,
It's a short drive. That's it. So you've got your bullet points and you're ready to go. But in reality, that doesn't actually serve anyone. It doesn't serve the adult, the care provider who's trying to show up authentically and lovingly, because when time is of the essence, we don't get to be our full selves, right? We have to hit the key points.
Absolutely.
And then that usually comes in with shame and prevention. So I always encourage folks to know and to name that we can come back to the conversations constantly. When I work with young people, I'm always like, this is part one of infinity. That's it. And if it's not with me, it can be with somebody else. And that's beautiful and that's lovely. But really building that, not even building, but tearing down that bridge and replacing it with a bridge that knows that there's always time to come back and forth, right? We can always come back. We can always have more conversations, particularly because sexuality and identity and desires and the language that we use are almost always changing. There's always space for that. So why not give the humans the same space that we give our concepts and language?
It's almost exciting when I hear you talk. Sorry, my voice.
No worries.
Because I don't know, it gives a sense of it's just right.
Yeah.
It's not permission to go out and have sex at school or in the bathroom or whatever. What we're talking about is this freedom to own a part of our bodies that in so many cases we've been told it's not ours.
Yeah.
We don't get to do anything because we want to, because society tells us we can't.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing from you is this sense of unlocking, not that little box, but unlocking, a part of who we are.
Yeah. Yeah. As I've been applying a decolonial lens to, truthfully, my entire life, my gender identity, my sexuality, my practices, my relationship structures, what I've learned from my ancestors and from my elders is that sexuality is a sacred part of us. It is a divine part of us. It is not something that we have to other or fear. And really, we have those messages because of these harmful systems that are in place. That's why we have those messages. But the reality is, it doesn't have to be like that, right? We can come back home. And when I say home, I mean back to our full selves. In the same way that my heart and my emotions are a part of my being, so is my sexuality and my sensuality. And being in relationship with that prepares me and gives me all of the tools to say no, right? More than it gives me the idea of, oh, I want to go have sex with everybody. It's quite the opposite, in fact. When we teach young people that, hey, your pleasure, your sexuality is sacred. You don't have to give that to everybody. And there will be people who ask, and you get to decide, and here's how it may feel when you really want to. Here's how you may be able to recognize a no in your body. Those are life skills. That's a life skill. And so I'm always telling people that sex ed is harm reduction. It is violence prevention. It is a life skill course. That's what it is.
You said something about the freedom to take your time.
Yeah.
To by unlocking our sensuality, our sexuality.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of what you had said earlier about being in the car and you've got, 5 minutes before you reach your destination, you need to hurry up. So you kind of end it with, and you'll die, right? Because you just kind of want to put an exclamation mark on don't have sex, right? And so a kid's going to be like, oh God, the guilt, the almost that rush mentality, like when they have 5 minutes, they're going to have sex just because they're curious and it feels good, but they're going to do it very quickly without a lot of thought because we really haven't, I think, imposed the idea of thought in sexuality. It's fear-based. So it's don't do this, don't do that. You're going to get this, you're going to get that. Carry this little box with condoms around with you 24 hours a day, right? Yep. There wasn't a lot in there about you get to decide who and when.
Yeah.
And it slows down the process. So instead of these kids at 15 thinking, oh man, I got a second and it's between classes and we're in the bathroom, let's do it.
Let's go. Yep.
Let's go. Not a lot of thought, right?
Yeah.
Now we're saying, hey, slow down. Take it easy.
Yeah.
It's going to be there.
Yeah.
Other than 15 years old.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's going to be there at 25 and 35 and 45. And then at 55, people think we should die. So,
that's not how that works. Sorry.
These kids think, something like, ew.
Oh, I love telling them. I'm like, all old people are having sex. Enjoy. Get used to it. This is life. Ha ha.
And they kind of look at us like, oh, that's gross. No. Yeah. Oh, well, too bad. A whole nother podcast, right?
Right.
So geriatric sex. But the reality is I love this because it's not just about how to teach them. Like in other words, okay, this goes here and this is a menstrual cycle and 14 days and da 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 da.
Yeah.
It's really about setting this this environment of allowing them to take in the information and process it slowly, safely, and with this sense of ownership.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the intentionality of it, right? Like giving them the space to do that. Let them be intentional in figuring out what they might want to do, what they may not want to do before they have to feel like they're rushing into it. I just came back from Virginia Tech doing a couple of sessions over there, and I really appreciate the vulnerability of young people. I really, really do. And so overwhelmingly what people had questions about was, how do I say no, not right now, without making them feel like I don't want them, like they're rejected, or I have no interest in them. And there's a lot of guilt that we feel when we say no, not right now, right? But that's because sex ed itself is poised in this place that it is urgency, it is a rush, and we assume that all young people have these raging hormones and they just want to go out and do the things. And I'm just like, that is not actually true. Harvard did a study, I want to say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where they asked teens and young people their perspective on sex education. And what the young people said was, okay, I know how to now put a condom on, but I don't know how to talk about my feelings. Yeah. No one's talking to me about what do I do if my friend is mad at me? I don't know how to emotionally regulate. What do I do? So here we are thinking, all young people want to do is like take their clothes off and have wild sex all the time. And young people are actually like, please help me navigate a crush. How do I tell my friend that I like them? Like,
No, that's so true. And then, and the biggest piece, right? We see this a lot with kiddos in foster care.
Yeah.
Is this sense of no one likes me. I'm not accepted. I don't even accept myself. I don't have a lineage, right? Because so much of what my past is, I'm not even aware of because I'm 5 houses past my original.
Yeah.
And I left there at 2.
Yeah.
And they really just don't have a sense of who they are.
Yeah.
And you're right. I see this all the time. I see it all the time. It's not about the sex. It's about the feelings behind it. It's about, I'm doing it because of the pressure that I'm feeling, that if I don't, this person's not going to like me anymore.
Yeah.
And I only have one friend because I've transferred schools 5 times and I don't want to lose that friend.
Yeah.
So we would almost be better off talking about how to navigate those conversations and those feelings as opposed to sex and what it's going to do, because the fear factor is not working.
It's not working.
It's not.
It's not working. It's not working. And I mean, truthfully, it's never worked. Like it's actually never worked. And that's not going to shift. And so I think it's really on us to do the thing, to be the change. And I wish that we lived in a society that really valued young people as experts. And so we would take their information and their perspective more into consideration, but very rarely do most people in most systems, let alone consider what young people are saying to be expertise. And like, yes, I definitely know, I understand this. And so because of that, we have to recognize that as folks with the positionality, with the authority, it's on us to say, hey, yes, this is a human sexuality piece. I'm not going to start this with condoms. I'm not going to start this with body parts even. I'm going to start with feelings. Like, let's talk about feelings.
I love it. I love it. We started off with the foundation of why someone would even engage.
Yes.
Nobody's going to have sex because they like the way a body part looks necessarily. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
not like, woo! It's about, wow, I don't want to be disliked. I don't want the rumor that I didn't do whatever. I mean, there's so much to this, and especially with social media, because you can be blasted for just about anything.
Yeah.
It's scary for these kids.
Yeah.
We
But
need
this
to
is-
empower them.
But that's where sex ed fails so often, right? We think that we're offering them tools to empower themselves to use protective barriers and to say no and blah, blah, blah. And sure, maybe you are doing that and that like I can recognize, okay, this is a latex barrier. I know how to put it on. But does that mean that I know how to have the conversation and say, actually, I feel a little bit pressured right now. And so this is not the right moment for it? No. Let alone are we equipping them with the tools to have the following conversations, right? If the person rejects their no, or if they try to push and pressure, like we really do have to equip them with the tools to have these conversations, because it's not just about the body. Sex ed focuses so much on, it's what I like to call an external approach, right? And the current climate of most sex ed it's like sex is something that happens to you. Like what? Like it's like an outside of you thing. And so you only need to learn about your body when you are given access to someone else. Like, what are you talking about? That is not how that has to go, my love. No way. No way.
It's the old saying, I lost my virginity.
Yeah. You lost nothing.
It's victimization, right? Like I couldn't control it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have a 17-year-old. And I want to use this liberation approach. Okay. As opposed to prevention. And I hate to say it, but that driving the car, I already started the prevention. So, Okay. Okay. So let's just pretend
it's okay. There's a safe
that I
space.
didn't mess it up. Okay.
Okay.
So what do I say? How do I start?
I would start by saying exactly what you just said and naming that you feel like you already messed it up. That vulnerability, that accountability. When we model things like that, it stays with young people for longer than here's how you put on a condom or here are the statistics of chlamydia, among young people. But to be able to model that and say, hey, I think I jumped into this conversation in a reactive way, and I was influenced by, by my sex ed, by my fears, the things that I don't want for you, the things that I do want for you, and let them hold you accountable, right? Like, how did that feel for you? I can share that for me, it didn't feel great. And so I'd really like to come to a place where we can come back to the conversation in a way that does feel great. And then even that language of feel great, we want to unpack that too, because it's not always going to feel great. So naming that to young people, I'm like one of the most transparent people I know. So when I'm working with young people, I'm like, this is going to feel fucking weird. That's just it. Like, this shit is going to feel weird, okay? And that's okay. But the bigger feeling that we want to be present when we have these conversations is safety. It's not necessarily comfort or even security in that I'm going to get it right, but it's that you feel safe and that your young people feel safe in those conversations and in the environment that you're having them in. And so asking the question, right? Like, what is safety to you? What are some things that I can do? Usually it's like, I want snacks. I need fidget things so that I can do things with my body, get some of the chaotic energy out while I still try to have this conversation. And then have the conversation. So you can structure it around specific questions that they have. You can go in with vulnerability of what your experience was like with sex ed, things that you wish that you learned, things that you're picking up through your podcast guests, right? Like, I tell everyone, literally everyone, I'm like, throw me under the bus, okay? Use me as an excuse, as an intro into a conversation anytime, because sometimes it's just easier to do that, right? Hey, I met this sex educator. I was listening to their podcast. They said this really interesting thing. Let's talk about it.
Oh, you'll be under the bus this week sometime.
I will
so
be.
Just, I
love it.
Steph, under.
Love it.
Yeah, no, I'm all over it because I'm ready. You know what I'm really excited about, Steph,
Tell
is
me.
that based on our conversation today, honestly, I feel like this freedom.
Yeah.
I feel like this freedom that that I didn't have before this conversation.
Yeah.
Because I felt this like, unbelievable pressure to do it right.
Yeah.
To make sure that I had all the facts, to make sure that I made sure that because my child's safety, my child's future, I felt like I'm carrying on my back.
Yeah.
Or sometimes in both arms, right? Yeah. And based on our conversation, I just feel almost this happiness about saying, you know what? It's your body. It's your sexuality. And I can offer some details, facts, whatever it is that you need.
Yeah.
And we can not even go on a short drive. We can go on a long drive and have this conversation in a comfortable way. But I'm not here to tell you what to do with your body because God gave that to you.
Yeah.
And it is your body to do with as you please, but I want you to be safe in doing it.
Yeah.
So here's some tips and tools, right? To make sure that you're safe when you're making those big decisions, right?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that vulnerability and that share. I'm holding that really close to my heart, particularly because, same. I felt all of the fear, all of the shame, all of the stigma of the sex ed that I was putting out to not just young people that I work with, but the ones that I help parent and raise in my family. I was like, I don't think I'm doing the thing. This is harm, right? And it really wasn't until I got to this place of the realization that sex ed really is just about fear-based and shame-based and guilt-based control and prevention. And all of that is a manifestation of colonialism. Like, that is colonialism. So when we can name it that, we, again, just offering yourself the grace, just offering it to yourself and saying, I don't know it all. I don't have to know it all. But what I do need this young person to know is that I am a safe person to speak to. Not that I'm always right. Not that I always have the answers, but that I am a safe person to speak to. Because if we always go the prevention-based way or the guilt-based or the fear-based way, what happens is young people grow up, right? They explore, they do things, and then we don't hear about that part of their lives. We are not allowed into the vulnerability of, hey, I had unprotected sex. I'm a little bit scared. Do you know where I can go for testing or for plan B? They don't come to us with that because we've terrified them, because we were terrified ourselves. So it's a vicious cycle if we don't do the intentional disruption of it,
Absolutely. There's somewhere between this sense of fear
Yeah.
And this sense of, free sex and orgies and, all of that. We have to find that, our pendulum that we live in, right? Our
Yeah.
societal pendulum. We have got to land in a place of safety. We have to land in that place of vulnerability and grace.
Yes.
Steph, I want to thank you for helping me personally to find a better balance when I'm having these really important conversations with my youth. And just for your spirit, I really, really enjoyed this podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. I so appreciate being here and being able to have the vulnerable conversations that you offered. So thank you.